I'm 32 years old, work as an electrician in Portland, Oregon, and make about $72,000 a year. I've been an avid hunter since I was a teenager, going out every fall with my dad and uncle. In October 2023, my dad told me about a hunting cabin his friend owned in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, about 2 hours northeast of Portland. His friend said we could use it for a weekend hunt, completely free. The cabin was pretty remote. You had to drive about 45 minutes on a Forest Service road, then hike in another 2 miles on an unmarked trail. My dad couldn't make it that weekend because of work, so I decided to go solo. I'd hunted alone plenty of times before, so it wasn't a big deal. I left Portland on a Friday afternoon, around 3 p.m., driving my 2018 Ford F-150. The drive was beautiful, fall colors everywhere, not much traffic once I got off the main highway. I reached the Forest Service road around 5 p.m. and followed the directions my dad had given me. The road was rough, full of potholes and loose gravel, but my truck handled it fine. I parked at the trailhead around 5:45 p.m. The sun was already getting low, and I knew I only had about an hour of good daylight left. I grabbed my backpack, my Remington 700 rifle, and started hiking. The trail was overgrown in places, like it hadn't been used much recently. I had to stop a few times to check my phone's GPS to make sure I was going the right direction. Cell service was spotty, 1 or 2 bars at most. I reached the cabin just as the sun was setting. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 200 square feet, built from old weathered logs. There was a single window facing the trail, a metal roof, and a wooden door with a simple latch. No electricity, no running water, just a basic shelter. I opened the door and looked inside. There was a small wood stove in the corner, a cot with an old sleeping bag, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and some shelves with dusty supplies. A kerosene lantern sat on the table. The place smelled musty, like it hadn't been opened in months. I set my stuff down, lit the lantern, and started unpacking. I had food for 3 days, a water filter, and plenty of warm clothes. I spent the next hour gathering firewood and getting the wood stove going. By the time I had a fire burning and some warmth in the cabin, it was completely dark outside. I made a simple dinner of instant rice and canned chicken, ate it at the table, then sat by the fire reading a book on my phone until around 10 p.m. That's when I heard the first knock. 3 loud, deliberate knocks on the cabin door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone out here. The cabin was miles from the nearest road, and my dad's friend hadn't mentioned anyone else using it. I stood up slowly, walked to the door, and called out, "Hello?" No response. I waited a few seconds, then opened the door. There was nobody there, just darkness and the sound of wind moving through the trees. I stepped outside onto the small wooden porch, looking around with my flashlight. Nothing. No footprints in the dirt, no sign of anyone. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to convince myself it was just a branch hitting the cabin or something. But those knocks had been too distinct, too evenly spaced. I sat back down by the fire, my rifle now leaning against the chair next to me. About 30 minutes later, it happened again. 3 knocks, same rhythm, same intensity. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, threw open the door, and shined the light in every direction. Nothing. Nobody. But this time, I noticed something. The knocks had come from the door, but there was no tree close enough to the cabin to hit it. The nearest trees were at least 15 feet away. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I went back inside, closed the door, and this time I wedged one of the chairs under the door handle. I sat on the cot with my rifle across my lap, staring at the door. The knocks came again at midnight, then at 1 a.m., then at 2 a.m. Always 3 knocks, always the same rhythm. I didn't open the door again. I just sat there, listening, my finger near the trigger of my rifle. Around 3 a.m., I heard something new. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the cabin. They'd start at the front, move along the side, go around the back, then come up the other side and stop at the front again. Then silence for a few minutes. Then the footsteps would start again, same pattern. This went on for hours. I didn't sleep, I couldn't. I just sat on that cot, watching the door, listening to those footsteps circle the cabin over and over again. When the first light of dawn started coming through the window, around 6 a.m., the footsteps stopped. I waited another hour making sure it was fully light outside. Then I carefully moved the chair, opened the door, and looked around. The ground around the cabin was mostly hard-packed dirt and pine needles. I couldn't see any clear footprints. But near the corner of the cabin, I found something that made my blood run cold. Scratch marks. Deep scratch marks in the wood of the cabin wall, about chest height, like someone had dragged their fingernails down the logs. I immediately packed up my stuff, threw everything in my backpack, and started hiking back to my truck. I didn't care about hunting, I just wanted to get out of there. The hike back felt longer than it should have. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. When I finally reached my truck around 8 a.m., I threw my gear in the back and drove straight home. I didn't stop at any of the small towns along the way. I just drove. When I got back to Portland that afternoon, I called my dad and told him what happened. He seemed concerned, but also a little skeptical. Like maybe I'd just psyched myself out being alone in the woods. Then he called his friend, the one who owned the cabin. My dad called me back an hour later. His voice sounded different, shaken. His friend said nobody's used that cabin in over 2 years, my dad said. He stopped going there after some hunters reported seeing someone watching them from the woods. The last group that stayed there said someone tried to break in during the night. Why didn't you tell me that before? I asked. I didn't know, my dad said. He never mentioned it. I guess he didn't think it was a big deal, or maybe he forgot. I asked if his friend had reported it to the Forest Service or the police. He had. Rangers went out there and searched the area, but never found anyone. They figured it was just someone living off the grid, maybe a squatter or a transient passing through. But that didn't explain the knocking, the footsteps, the scratch marks. I've been hunting for almost 20 years, and I've spent countless nights alone in the woods. I've never been scared like I was that night. Whatever was outside that cabin, circling it for hours, knocking on the door, scratching at the walls, it wasn't an animal. Animals don't knock 3 times in perfect rhythm. They don't walk in circles around a building for hours. It was a person. And whoever they were, they knew I was inside. They knew I was alone, and they wanted me to know they were there. I haven't been back to that cabin. I'll never go back, and I'll never hunt alone in a remote area like that again. My dad's friend ended up selling the property a few months later. He told my dad he just didn't want the liability anymore, but I think the real reason is that he knew something was wrong out there. Sometimes I think about that night, about those footsteps circling the cabin, about those scratch marks on the wood, and I wonder how many other people have stayed in that cabin and heard the same thing. I wonder how many of them made it out. I'm 27 years old, work as a graphic designer in Boise, Idaho, and make around $58,000 a year. I'm really into wildlife photography as a hobby, and I'd been planning a solo camping trip to the Sawtooth National Forest for months. The goal was to set up some trail cameras to capture footage of elk and maybe even wolves if I got lucky. In September 2024, I finally had a week off work and decided to go for it. I loaded up my 2016 Subaru Outback with camping gear, camera equipment, and enough food for 5 days. The drive from Boise to the Sawtooth Wilderness took about 3 hours. I reached the trailhead around noon on a Tuesday. The parking area was empty, which wasn't surprising given it was a weekday and late in the season. Most people don't camp in September because the nights get cold, sometimes dropping below freezing. I hiked about 6 miles into the forest, following a trail that eventually became less and less defined. I was heading to a remote area near a small creek that I'd scouted on Google Earth. It looked like a good spot for wildlife. By 4 p.m., I'd found the perfect campsite. It was in a clearing surrounded by dense pine forest, with the creek about 50 yards away. I set up my tent, a 2-person REI quarter dome, and got a fire going. After dinner, I grabbed my trail cameras. I'd brought 3 of them, Bushnell Trophy cams, motion activated with night vision. My plan was to set them up in a triangle around my campsite, about 100 yards out in each direction, facing inward. That way I could capture any animals passing through the area. I spent the next hour hiking out to each location, strapping the cameras to trees and testing them to make sure they were working properly. Each camera had a little screen on the back where you could review the footage. By the time I finished, the sun was setting. I made my way back to camp, feeling pretty good about the setup. That night was peaceful. I sat by the fire, drank some whiskey from my flask, and watched the stars. Around 10 p.m., I climbed into my sleeping bag and fell asleep to the sound of the creek. I woke up around 7 a.m., made coffee and breakfast, then decided to check the trail cameras to see if they'd captured anything overnight. I hiked out to the first camera, the one I'd positioned to the north of my camp. I pressed the playback button and scrolled through the footage. Nothing. Just some branches moving in the wind. I went to the second camera, the one to the east. Same thing. No animals, just empty forest. The third camera was to the west, deeper into the woods. I hiked out there, found the tree I'd strapped it to, and hit playback. The first few clips were the same as the others. Empty forest, wind, nothing interesting. But then I saw something that made me stop. A clip from 2:37 a.m. showed a person walking through the frame. I replayed it, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood what I was seeing. Number. It was definitely a person. A man, wearing dark clothes, walking slowly through the trees. He wasn't on a trail. He was just walking through the middle of the forest at 2:37 in the morning in complete darkness. The camera's night vision made everything look green and grainy, but I could clearly see him. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with broad shoulders. He was walking directly toward my campsite. My stomach dropped. I fast-forwarded to the next clip, 2:41 a.m. The man was gone. I checked the timestamps on all the cameras. They were synchronized. So if he'd walked toward my camp at 2:37 a.m., he would have reached it by 2:45 a.m. at the latest. I'd been asleep in my tent at that time. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone had been at my campsite in the middle of the night, and I had no idea. I immediately started hiking back to my camp, my heart pounding. When I got there, I looked around for any signs that someone had been there. Footprints, disturbed dirt, anything. I found them near my tent, boot prints in the soft soil. They circled my tent. Whoever this person was, they'd walked around my tent multiple times while I was sleeping inside. I felt sick. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but of course there was no service. I was 6 miles from the trailhead, miles from any other people. I made a decision. I was leaving, immediately. I started breaking down my camp, throwing everything into my backpack as fast as I could. I didn't care about being organized. I just wanted to get out of there. But then I thought about the trail cameras. If this person was still in the area, the cameras might have captured more footage. I needed to check them. I hiked back out to the western camera, the one that had caught the man on video. I pulled up the playback and scrolled through the rest of the night's footage. 3:14 a.m. The man appeared again, walking back through the frame, heading away from my camp. 3:52 a.m. He was back, this time standing still in the frame, just standing there in the dark forest, staring directly at the camera. My hands started shaking. I fast-forwarded, 4:18 a.m., still standing there, same position, not moving. 4:35 a.m., gone. I checked the eastern camera, nothing. I checked the northern camera, 5:47 a.m. The man appeared in this footage too. He was closer to the camera now, maybe 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a tree, just standing there, watching. I felt like I was going to throw up. I ran back to my campsite, grabbed my backpack, and started hiking toward the trailhead as fast as I could. I didn't even bother taking down my tent. I just left it. The hike back felt like it took forever. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me. Every time I heard a branch snap or a bird call, my heart would race. I made it to the trailhead around noon. My car was still there, untouched. I threw my gear in the back, got in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath, trying to process what had just happened. Then I remembered the trail cameras. I'd left 2 of them out there, the western camera and the northern camera. I'd only grabbed the eastern one. Part of me wanted to just drive away and forget about them. But those cameras cost $200 each, and more importantly, they had footage of this person. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, debating what to do. Finally, I decided I'd drive to the nearest town, find somewhere with cell service, and call the police. Let them go, get the cameras. The nearest town was Stanley, about 30 miles away. I drove straight there, found a gas station, and called 911. I explained everything to the dispatcher, the trail cameras, the footage, the boot prints around my tent. She said she'd send someone out, but it would take a while because the location was so remote. A Custer County Sheriff's deputy called me about 2 hours later. He said he'd hiked out to my campsite with a ranger from the Forest Service. They found my tent, still set up. They found the boot prints. But the 2 trail cameras I'd left behind were gone. Someone had taken them. The deputy asked me if I still had the eastern camera, the one I'd brought back with me. I did. He told me to bring it to the sheriff's office in Chalice so they could review all the footage. I drove to Chalice that evening and handed over the camera. The deputy reviewed the footage while I waited. He asked me a lot of questions. Had I seen anyone else at the trailhead when I arrived? Had I told anyone where I was going? Did I recognize the man in the footage? No, and no. He said they'd investigate, but honestly, there wasn't much they could do. The footage was too grainy to identify the person, and without the other 2 cameras, they didn't have much to go on. I asked him if there had been other reports of people acting strangely in that area. He hesitated, then said yes. Over the past year, there had been 3 separate reports of solo campers encountering someone in the woods at night. All of them described the same thing. A man, tall, wearing dark clothes, just standing in the trees watching them. None of the incidents had turned violent, but all of them had been disturbing enough that the campers left immediately. The Forest Service had increased patrols in the area, but they'd never found anyone. I asked the deputy what he thought was going on. He said, honestly, he didn't know. Could be someone living off the grid, could be a drifter, could be someone with mental health issues who just likes scaring people. Or, he said, it could be someone scouting potential victims. That last part stuck with me. I never went back to the Sawtooth Wilderness. I still do wildlife photography, but I don't camp alone anymore. And I definitely don't set up trail cameras in remote areas. Because now I know that when you're out there in the woods, alone, in the dark, you're not always alone. Sometimes someone is watching, and sometimes they want you to know it. I'm 35 years old, work as a software developer in Seattle, Washington, and make about $142,000 a year. I've been backpacking since college, and I try to do at least one big solo trip every year. It's my way of unplugging from work and getting away from the constant noise of the city. In August 2023, I planned a 4-day backpacking trip through the North Cascades National Park. I'd researched a loop trail that was about 35 miles total, going through some really remote backcountry. The trail wasn't heavily trafficked, which was exactly what I wanted. I got all my permits sorted out, packed my gear, and drove up to the trailhead on a Thursday morning. It was about a 3-hour drive from Seattle. The weather forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, temperatures in the low 70s during the day, dropping to the 40s at night. I started hiking around 10 a.m. My pack weighed about 35 pounds, which included my tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, and all my other gear. I'm in decent shape, so the weight wasn't too bad. The first day was amazing. The trail wound through old-growth forest, crossed a few streams, and eventually opened up to some incredible mountain views. I passed a few other hikers in the morning, but by early afternoon, I hadn't seen anyone for hours. I reached my planned campsite around 5 p.m. It was a designated spot near a small alpine lake, completely empty. I set up my tent, a big Agnes copper spur, filtered some water from the lake, and made dinner. As the sun started to set, I sat by the lake and just enjoyed the silence. No cell service, no internet, no distractions. Just me and the mountains. I went to bed around 9 p.m., exhausted from the hike. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something moving outside my tent. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, or a raccoon. But then I heard something that made me freeze. Whistling. Someone was whistling a tune. It was faint, like it was coming from somewhere in the forest near my campsite. The melody was slow and eerie, almost like a lullaby. I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening, my heart starting to pound. The whistling continued for maybe a minute, then stopped. I waited, barely breathing, straining to hear anything else. Nothing. Just silence. I told myself it was probably just another backpacker camp nearby. Maybe they couldn't sleep and were just wandering around. It was weird, but not necessarily threatening. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I woke up around 7 a.m. I got out of my tent and looked around the campsite. There were no other tents, no sign of anyone else. I walked around the perimeter of the camping area, looking for footprints or any indication that someone had been there. I found boot prints near the edge of the forest, about 20 feet from my tent. They were fresh. Size looked like maybe a men's 11 or 12. The prints led into the forest and then disappeared into the underbrush. I felt uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it. Someone had probably just walked through during the night, maybe taking a shortcut to another campsite. I packed up my gear and continued on the trail. Day 2 was supposed to be the longest stretch, about 12 miles with some significant elevation gain. The hiking was tough, but beautiful. I crossed a high mountain pass around noon, took a break, ate some trail mix, and enjoyed the view. I didn't see a single other person all day. By 6 p.m., I reached my second campsite, another designated spot, this one near a creek in a dense forest. The area felt more enclosed than the night before, surrounded by thick trees on all sides. I set up my tent, made dinner, and as the sun started to set, I realized something that made me uncomfortable. The only other campsite in this area was about half a mile back down the trail. I'd passed it on my way here. It had been empty, which meant if someone was camping nearby, they weren't at a designated site. They were camping somewhere off-trail in the wilderness. That's not illegal, but it's unusual. Most backpackers stick to designated sites to minimize impact, and because they're easier to find. I tried not to think about it too much. I climbed into my tent around 9 p.m. and tried to get some sleep. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to the whistling again. This time, it was closer, much closer. It sounded like it was coming from just outside my tent, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. The same slow, eerie melody. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart racing. I grabbed my headlamp, but didn't turn it on. I just sat there in the darkness, listening. The whistling continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. I could hear the leaves and twigs crunching under someone's boots. They walked around the entire perimeter of my tent, slowly, taking their time. Then they stopped directly in front of the tent door. I could see the silhouette of someone standing there through the thin fabric of the tent. Just standing there, not moving, not saying anything. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to yell, to confront whoever this was. But another part of me was terrified of what might happen if I did. I sat there frozen, staring at the silhouette. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute, the person walked away. I heard their footsteps fade into the forest. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat there in my tent, holding my knife, waiting for sunrise. As soon as there was enough light to see, around 6 a.m., I got out of my tent and looked around. There were boot prints everywhere, the same size as before. They circled my tent multiple times, and near the front of my tent, pressed into the dirt, was a clear handprint. Someone had knelt down and put their hand on the ground right in front of my tent door. That was it. I was done. I didn't care about finishing the loop. I just wanted to get out of there. I packed up my gear as fast as I could and started hiking back the way I'd come. I figured the fastest way out was to backtrack to the trailhead rather than continue the loop. The hike back was brutal. I was exhausted from not sleeping, and I was moving as fast as I could, which meant I was practically jogging downhill with a 35-pound pack. Around 10 a.m., I reached the high mountain pass again. I stopped to catch my breath and looked back down the trail. There was someone hiking up behind me, about half a mile back. I could see them clearly, a man tall wearing a dark jacket and a backpack. I felt my stomach drop. I started hiking faster. I didn't want to be paranoid, but after the last 2 nights, I wasn't taking any chances. I hiked for another hour, pushing myself hard. When I reached a clearing, I stopped and looked back again. The man was closer now, maybe a quarter mile behind me, and he was moving fast, faster than a normal hiking pace. He was following me. I started running. I didn't care how much my pack weighed or how tired I was. I just ran. The trail was steep and rocky, and I nearly tripped multiple times, but I kept going. I ran for what felt like forever, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. Finally, I saw the trailhead parking lot. My car was there, exactly where I'd left it. There were 2 other cars in the lot now, which meant other hikers were around. I ran to my car, threw my pack in the back, got in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath, my hands shaking. I looked back at the trailhead. The man emerged from the forest about 5 minutes later. He stopped at the edge of the parking lot and just stood there, staring at my car. I started the engine and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was back in cell service range, about 30 miles down the road. I pulled over and called 911. I explained everything to the dispatcher, the whistling, the footsteps, the boot prints, the man following me. She took down all my information and said she'd send rangers to investigate. A park ranger called me back the next day. She said they'd sent a team to search the area where I'd been camping. They didn't find anyone, but they did find evidence of someone camping off-trail in multiple locations along the route. Makeshift shelters, fire pits, trash. She said it looked like someone had been living in the backcountry for an extended period, possibly weeks or even months. I asked if they'd had other reports of someone harassing backpackers. She paused, then said yes. Over the past 2 months, there had been 4 separate reports of solo hikers encountering someone at night, whistling, circling tents, following people. All the reports described the same thing: a tall man in dark clothing. They'd increased patrols and put up warning signs at trailheads, but they hadn't been able to locate the person. She said that living off the grid in the backcountry isn't illegal, but stalking and harassing people is. If they found the person, they'd arrest them. That was 6 months ago. I haven't been back to the North Cascades since. I check the park's website periodically to see if there are any updates, but I haven't seen anything. I still backpack, but I don't do solo trips anymore. I always go with at least one other person now. And I avoid remote trails, because I learned something on that trip. When you're alone in the wilderness, you're vulnerable, and there are people out there who know that. People who watch, people who follow, and people who whistle in the dark.